The Gender Equality Index is based on the belief that transparency is the new indicator of a company's commitment to gender equality. What drove your decision at Portland General Electric to be more transparent?
You know, at Portland General, we're a publicly traded utility based in the Pacific Northwest, and equality, diversity, equity, and inclusion is critical to everything that we do. It's important to our customers. It's important to the communities we serve. Clearly, we get better results as a result of being more diverse. We are more creative. The pace of change and our ability to react quickly to important events is that much better when we are able to have everyone in our company bring their whole selves to work.
Terrific. Ladies, would you like to add anything to that?
Well, I certainly believe in everything that Maria said, and similarly at P&G, it's really a core value. Diversity, inclusion, everybody being able to bring their best is very important. I'll answer a slightly different part of that from a transparency standpoint. One of the things that we have chosen to be very transparent about is our numbers. I was in a conversation this week with a partner of ours who was talking about whether they should be that transparent. And from a P&G standpoint, we have made great progress, but we have a very high standard for ourselves. We want to be 50-50 at every part, in every part of our company, all the way through to our executive team and our board of directors. And we're not there yet in every part of the world and every discipline, every level. And so we have been very overt at setting targets for ourselves, targets that are very broadly shared, targets that are transparent and open, and we talk about them all the time. We talk about our progress, we talk about where we haven't made progress, we talk about work remaining to do, we talk about diagnosis of what is getting in the way, whether that is intentional career planning or bias or equality-based policies. But that transparency of where we are leads to a confidence and authenticity in our efforts. Because exactly as Maria said, our stakeholders want to know what's behind the company of the brands that they're buying. Our stakeholders, including our investors, our suppliers, our partners, our employees, and it's very important to them. And so we believe transparency is one of those core values that will be front and center to making sure people see our work as authentic, true, and with great intentionality.
Martina, how is transparency used at Mastercard?
So that I can only second what Maria and Caroline was saying. At Mastercard, it's hugely important from a transparency of the numbers point of view and how we measure people. And you know, being the CFO of the company, I can only relate to numbers, right? And it's hugely important for our CHRO and for our CEO and for the board. So the tone of the top is hugely important for a company to be taking these kind of things on. But I want to pick off also something that Maria was touching on from a strategy point of view. It has to be hugely connected to your strategy of the company. And for us, you know, when you look at the type of products that Mastercard puts out there, you know, consumers, you know, last I looked, 50% of the world are women. And so we obviously need to make sure that we have the right kind of product for their challenges every day. In fact, when you look at the financial decisions that are being made in a household worldwide, it's 80% of women who make the financial decisions in a household. And by the way, it doesn't change very differently when you go from country to country. When you look at women entrepreneurs, about 98 million businesses in the world are being run by women. And you know, only a quarter of them, for instance, get loans. And we look at this not only from a male, woman, from a gender balance point of view, we look at it from a whole diversity point of view. We have a business in 210 countries and territories in the world, and I would suggest to you today that pretty much every country has a very diverse population, and our products are being used by them. So we have to make sure that that gets included. And so what we found, Peter, was it wasn't just the numbers, it wasn't just what we did for our own people in the workforce. We needed to connect what we did in the market to our people, and then when we started doing that, it kind of took off on its own, and we're seeing some very tangible results.
The question that often comes up is, how are you holding your managers accountable for a broad-based diversity and inclusion strategy, not just gender-focused, but more broadly than that. Perhaps you'd spend just a minute, each of you, talking about how that factors into your leadership.
Sure. At Portland General, we've had something that we've called our guiding behaviors for a number of decades. And one of those 6 guiding behaviors is to value diversity. And so every manager in the company is rewarded based on their results, but also on how they achieve those results. And our guiding behaviors are core lens but through which we look at through that. One of the things we talked about this morning was that it's not just about a glass ceiling, but it's also about a sticky bottom. And it's really important that we bring in more engineers and more frontline utility workers. Utility jobs are exceptionally good jobs in our economy. They're well-paying, they're technical positions, and we need to have more women and people of color in those roles. And so we've really changed how we recruit and how we focus on retaining people at those levels and in key engineering areas. But it's a core part of our culture and how we look at every single manager in our company.
Carolyn?
Very similar. So from an internal accountability standpoint, we have accountability, as I was mentioning, to our targets. We talk about those, we review those, and certainly every executive and everyone who manages people is responsible for making progress against those, and those are very openly discussed. There's also an accountability externally, I guess, that I would think about. And as we're a company of brands, right? We have many leading brands, and we do a lot of advertising. And so the other external accountability is, does the voice of our brand stand for what is important, and how do we speak out on issues and topics that are important to consumers? And so the other accountability that we have found really drives momentum within our business is when our brands find their voice also on this topic of inclusion or on issues that are really important to today's consumers and stakeholders, including our employees. And so when we can find that integration and when we can find how that works, whether it's our Always Like a Girl campaign or our Ariel in Europe Share the Load campaign or our recent Gillette campaign about believing in the good of men, and standing up against bad behavior, any of those pieces, when we find a way to integrate it and really make it part of that brand message, we find that we can really drive the accountability within our organization, but also be a force for good and frankly, a force for growth for us as a company. And so there's an internal and an external view to that.
Martina, how does Ajay Banga, the CEO of Mastercard, evaluate senior level performance vis-a-vis this issue, and how closely is it tied to compensation, incentive compensation?
So Ajay, many of you probably know Ajay, he's absolutely fabulous in terms of how he thinks about this particular issue, and not just from a gender balance point of view, but also from a real diversity point of view, right? He's the CEO in America, Sikh with a turban, okay? So it's, very different face of a company. And when you look at our management team, it's extremely diverse in any respects. So he drives it down in a very significant way. It's not officially tied to compensation, but what he does is twice a year we have succession planning, very deep succession planning meetings in the company that every manager has to go through. And that's where the numbers actually come out and being transparent. And that's where you work with people in terms of what is working in a group and what is not working in a group. And so what we found is we don't have much of a problem from an intake point of view. We are finding plenty diverse people on the lower levels coming and wanting to be part of Mastercard because of our fabulous programs that we have. What our challenge often is in the middle layer. So in the middle, leadership layer and in the upper middle leadership layer, that at that point in time, things happen that don't make people to go to the next level. And so some of the things that we had to do is we had to put different programs in place. So for instance, Middle East Africa has their own challenges in terms of how the culture is developed, very different than in the United States. We started there with a program called Relaunch Your Career. And yes, it was targeted at women. What we actually found that a lot of men wanted to take advantage of that too. We love that. So now we're taking this all around the globe. And that actually helped us. We already have some tangible results. How from a succession planning point of view, we were able to attract people back into the workforce who can take then the next lever. But as Caroline said, it's a journey. We haven't arrived. And I'm not sure how long it will take us to arrive.
Yeah. The Gender Equality Index, like many things at Bloomberg, is basically built on over 70 different sets of data outcomes from 70 different survey questions. How are each of you using data to measure performance against this critically important competitive need to be diverse and inclusive?
So we use the measurements in a very significant way internally. But it's not just that. It's really a little bit what Carolyn touched on in terms of what are you doing in the marketplace with your products. And so what we measure in a very significant way is how are we behaving in each country to be helping. So I give some women examples. So for instance, we have this one product, it's called Tukuzi. And what it is, it's helping women farmers in Tanzania to make sure that they can buy ingredients for planting in the fields at world market prices rather than taking advantage of the middlemen in the little town. And then when they have to sell their produce, same thing, they can actually look with that app in terms of, and it's a payments app, they can look actually up what kind of prices they should be charging for the produce that they're selling. And we have quite a few of those kind of products besides our investments that we're actually making from an impact point of view. And I have to tell you, that is one thing that is probably one of the more difficult things that we're seeing in the world is that very little of the VC and the PE investment is actually going to women-led businesses. I think the number is out there of about 2% or something, which is pitiful. And we encourage our people, and we are making investments in this arena, to be taking that a step forward. And that gets measured too. So it's really what you measure in the business, in the outcome. It's not just, where you move people moving from a level point of view.
One of the things...
Carolyn, excuse me.
One of the things that we look at, we measure a lot of different things, particularly being a company that has a lot of engineers and very much focused on reliability in everything that we do. We also measure the more subtle sides through engagement survey. And you can really see a lot that comes out between different departments, different areas of the company, different jurisdictions. And one of the things that we've done for years, but we most recently did it with a third-party outside firm, came in and really looked at how we're paying at each different level based on experience and also based on the quality of the work and the performance reviews that employees are getting. And one of the things we found was that because we've been focusing on this for a long time, we have pay equity that is 0.997% between men and women in our company. And we actually have 102% for people of color versus everyone else in our company. And I think we only got that because we've been paying attention to it and measuring it more informally, but now more formally in our company.
We're very similar to this. We are, P&G, we're data geeks. We love data, and we use data to measure everything. But it's also to try to point to insights that can help us do better. So exactly as Martine says, obviously measuring the outcome, but we also look at the data inside to help us diagnose what's happening. So we identify our talent very early on. How do we think about our highest potential talent? What kind of assignments are we giving them? So we get very intentional in our talent planning to make sure that we have the pipeline that we want to continue to develop, and we know that we do because we have a very equally representative organization at junior levels, and we want to advance the very best talent and grow that equally. We also look at it from an equality-based policies. How are we thinking about who is taking advantage of our family leave policies, our paternity leave policies, our flexibility at work, and is there something we can do to drive that? Because we know that equality at home enables equality at work because we've got to drive those pieces. So we look at it that way. We did exactly as Maria said. We test to make sure that we can take out the bias in our systems. Are we paying equally? And we have the same correlation. We pay very equally for equal work, whether it is women and men or people of color or any other intersectionality that's self-declared. But what we also know is that we contribute to what we call the wealth gap, because we don't have 50-50 at the very tops of organizations. And so we're very open in talking about that. Our aspiration is 50-50 at all levels. When we get there, we will no longer contribute to the wealth gap, which is the biggest part of pay inequality, both for women and for people of color. So data is very important to us, but we use it in all cases. And the part I get the most excited about is when it can give us an insight as to what we have to change in a system to help us detect bias, because bias is still one of the big barriers that we deal with broadly today in terms of women's representation.
I think you bring up a really important point in terms of what goes on at home ends up showing up in the workplace. And we have a little bit of a missing middle as people come up through their careers, starting, relatively equally. Women are not making the same choices or getting the same opportunities at midpoint in their career. And one of the most popular and sought after programs that we have just put in place is with regards to full family leave, whether it's male, female, and the compliments that we get from men who are now taking paternity leave is off the charts in comparison to anything else that we've done. And it really is driving in those behaviors for young families, which will lead to more women in the very senior ranks in our companies. And we're fortunate in that our board of directors, our officer team is approximately 50% women and people of color, diversity. But as we move into our middle leadership ranks, that's where it gets tougher. And that missing middle is a real problem that all of our organizations are faced with.
Let me build a little bit on Maria's comments. The family leave policy was a huge game changer because it's for both men and women. And actually what we found is that our managers had to watch out for a few things. So often a man actually doesn't want to take the family leave policy because, it's a little bit ingrained in the culture. That's maybe not what you want to do. And we had to work with our managers to walk up to that person and say, we know you have a newborn at home. Let's figure out how you take advantage of this fantastic policy. And we do it not just to be kind to that person, but we know if that manager actually experienced what goes on at home and doesn't have their iPhone with them and doesn't get the 100 emails and gets a little bit off the dope, so to speak, they are a better manager when they come back into the office because they know what the people are going through when they are at home taking care of the family.
Absolutely true.
Carolyn, one thing that works and one thing that hasn't worked.
I think what works is intentionality. You have to be so intentional. I think what doesn't work and what continues to persist in the industry and organizations of all kinds today is this bias. And we continue to see this false narrative that talks about women's behaviors, women's styles, women's perceived choices that are the justification for the lack of progress. And I think that we know that much of that is false. We still talk about women's confidence gap or ambition gap or fear of failure, all of which is false and untrue, period. And so what we have to do is continue to look for that. I was, when you and I were together in January, I was on another panel, and we continue to think about dominant culture and dominant culture behavior, and that continues to show up. And there's a default to that dominant culture is often rooted in male behavior. And when we see something different from that, we label it as less than or lacking. And I'll give you an example from a conversation in this panel. One of the CEOs who, like you, is doing great work from an equality standpoint, very, very committed to it. But he was telling the story of hiring a CFO, as it turns out. And he was down to his two final candidates, a man and a woman. And he said to both of them, asked them the very same question. And he said, all right, my corporate tax rate, and I'm making up these numbers, my corporate tax rate is 27%. I need to get it to 21. Can you do that? And the man said, absolutely. He asked the very same question to the woman, and the woman paused and said, I don't have enough information to answer that question. And he said very openly, he said, my instinct was I'm going with the guy. That's the answer I wanted. He said through a lot of conversation that he had with his executive team, he said, I learned and I understood that hers was perhaps a more thoughtful answer. And I hired her, and it's been a good move. But that whole notion of what's the behavior and how does it show up and how are we socialized? And interestingly, last week I was in a meeting with somebody who works for me, a woman, and a colleague of mine, a man. And we were talking about this very tense negotiation that we were in. I'll describe it that way. And she was explaining it, and she said, you know, we're through round one, but we got to get through round 2 or 3, and you know, we're 50-50 at best. And my colleague said, okay, but we're through round 1, so we're good until we're not. Let's just say that. And she said, no, I'm not going to say that because it's a 50-50 shot, and I want to be very balanced, and she was. Now, the great news is coming out of that conversation, that was just a great discussion, and we moved forward, and we were all briefed on the issue. What didn't happen in that conversation is he didn't leave and he said, you know, I think she lacks a little confidence. I think she needs to be more assertive. That did not happen because we talk about this and bias all the time. Yeah. But there is still that natural instinct to go to dominant culture behavior. And when something shows up as different, we think about it differently. And I think, to your point, in this world today where we all own advancing the best talent and getting the very best talent for all of our organizations, as managers, we have to learn to see through that. We have to learn to navigate that and not let that bias get in the way. And you can do it, but you need that awareness and those systems, and you need that data to measure those biases in your system and biases in how we think about it. And you got to talk about it a lot.
Maria, one thing that hasn't worked.
You know, I would echo a lot of what Carolyn is saying around our thinking systems, our work systems, and for us, and I think it's for many companies, those on the front lines is probably where we need to spend more time and where we're making the least amount of progress. Frontline employees, our coworkers, they have hard jobs. They're frequently viewed as physical, much more labor-intensive jobs that maybe only can be done by men, and that just is not true. But it does mean that we have to have equipment that fits women, that is, that got a reaction.
That did.
Clearly. It still goes on today. This is a big deal, and it's a consciousness of thinking through at every point in time, am I being inclusive? Is our structure set up in an inclusive fashion? Is our procurement system working for all sizes of people in our company? And that's really important for us as we look at how do we make a difference as a company serving our customers, serving the communities. It's very important that we think in every single piece. And this is hard to do. When you have coworkers who are in the communities on the front lines, how do they handle all sorts of different situations? And that's really about a mindset. It's about something that's deeply cultural. And it's taking us a while to change, but if we don't measure it, we can't manage it. And it's something that makes a big difference to everyone that we serve.
Martina, want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing, so, you know, on the bias issue that Caroline so eloquently really laid out is if you really confront that, and we notice that in the company, when you really confront it and have the right conversations and have it at all levels, you're actually making some real progress, right? I mean, that is a real driver. What I find challenges is while I said before that our hiring is very equal from a gender as well as other diversity point of view, there are certain jobs where it's really hard to get diverse slates. And I'm getting really frustrated about that because if you just put one diverse person on your hiring slate, I don't call that a diverse slate, by the way, okay? It needs to be at least 2 or 3. But there are certain jobs, especially in technology, and we're hiring a lot of people in technology, where we need to work on the feeder pool in a much bigger way. That's why Mastercard is so hugely engaged on women in tech and girls who code and all that kind of stuff. But you know, you don't change that in 1 or 2 years. And that is where we really have to, as a society, thinking about what are we doing with our girls in order to make sure that they really understand STEM and that there are a lot of fun jobs that they can do. And by the way, you don't need to be brilliant at math to do all of those kind of jobs.
Carolyn, Maria, Martina, thank you for an engaging and insightful discussion.
Thank
you guys
you.
were great.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Thank you.